Yeah. Hey everybody, I'm Emma and I'm here with Sarah and we're going to get rolling on our second web archiving webinar. This one's on how to web archive, and it's the second in a series of three. First off, just a couple of housekeeping items. We'll do a Q&A at the end. So just please hold your questions and we'll take care of everything at the very, very end. We are recording this webinar and I will send out everybody an email with a link to it later this week. And then please stay muted. So just keep your microphone off, even if you want to stay silent. It'll just help cut down on the static. All right. And then first off, who are we? Why are we giving this webinar? Backlog is my company. We're an archival consulting firm. We work with smaller places that either can't afford or don't have a full-time archivist. We do archival needs assessments, which is basically like a roadmap to moving your collection forward. We do policy writing, so we've written some processing manuals for volunteers, and then we also do digitization plans. We also do genealogy research, so if you've got a brick wall that you can't get through in your ancestry, that's something we can work with you on. And then we also do family history. We do family history books and then oral history interviews. So basically everything that isn't genealogy research, like what do you do with the stuff once you found it? That's kind of our family history services. So I'm Emma. I founded Backlog after I was laid off in 2021. We work with museums across the US. We are based in St. Louis. And then I'm going to hand it over to Sarah from here.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad you all are here. It is a beautiful day in St. Louis. I hope it's a beautiful day wherever you are, or at least a tolerable day. So my full-time job is at Washington University in St. Louis, doing mostly web archiving and starting to do email archiving. And then I want to give a shout out to the National Building Arts Center, which if you're into archives of any kind, this is an archive of the built environment, buildings that, large, significant historic buildings that were being torn down. And they've salvaged a ton of them. It's a giant collection. It's in warehouses. So look up the National Building Arts Center if you're into that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So as Emma said, this is the second of three webinars. First webinar was, what is a web archive? Why are there web archives? And some examples. This one will be how do you create your own and some content surrounding that. And the third one, which is going to be in March, that's going to be how do you do research with a web archive? You've found some web archives. They contain content or knowledge that you're interested in that can help your research, whatever you're researching. How do you do that? How do you use them as a source? So a little bit of context. So I'm gonna keep answering the question of what is a web archive and why do we care? Why do we web archive? Because there have been different archival formats for years and years and years and years. Think about, clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, analog formats, paper, as it says here, like back in the day, there were diaries, which is a fantastic primary source for what it was like to live life in prior eras. Now we have blogs. Throughout the ages, there's been a ton of different types of paper resources. Now we have email, now we have websites. So it's really a continuum of all the same thing. We've always acquired and archived content that tells the human story or that shares research or news. And we're still doing the same thing. We're just doing it in a different format. But boy, is this format different. Next slide, please. So continued a little bit more context. So, we've all been in libraries and maybe you all have been in archives. So you have an idea of the size. You walk into a library and you're like, I could never read all these books. But if you go to a website, say you go to CNN.com, you're like, I don't know how many news articles are here. I don't know how long it would take me to read. I don't have any sense of scale. So here's a little bit about that. The Internet Archive, which we'll talk about a lot today, it's the biggest, it's kind of the original web archive, has 635 billion plus URLs. It has 40 petabytes of data. A petabyte, what is it? How big is a petabyte? It's 1,000 terabytes. So it's an extremely large unit of digital data. 1 petabyte is, equal to 1,000 terabytes. So some estimates, it's hard to judge, but you could say that a petabyte is the equivalent of 20 million tall filing cabinets or 500 billion pages of standard printed text. So 40 of those, 40 times 20 million tall filing cabinets. So that's just in one web archive. There's others. The other thing about the scope is think about what it used to take to publish your research or your thoughts. Back in the day, you had to have the means, you had to have money, you had to have materials. The printing press is invented, you had to have contact with a publisher. Think about in our lifetimes, if somebody wanted to publish a book, you had to contract with a publisher. You had to, your experience and your knowledge and your skill kind of had to be vetted by the people who are the gatekeepers in the world of publishing. That's gotten less so over the last generation or so. But now, you can self-publish a book. But think about what it takes to put something on the web. There's very, very low barrier. So, and this is exciting and daunting if you're an archivist, there's stuff being collected about people who are not traditionally in the historic record. So final note, so this last bullet point on this page is a quote from Ian Milligan, who is my favorite web archive researcher. He is the Associate Vice President of Research at the University of Waterloo outside Toronto in Canada. So I think his most quotable quote is, "You can't study the 1990s, without web archives." Think about if you're studying prior time periods, there's going to be books, there's going to be films, photos, all these other formats. But as time goes on, historians and people who do all kinds of research are really going to be depending on the web. And are we archiving the web? In some corners, yes, we are. So, and it's a valid thing to do. So we're going to get into that. Next slide, please. Here's kind of 3 areas that we're going to cover today. How can a web archive be useful to an organization? There's ones that are out there that you can use that have tons of stuff in them, but you might want to consider making your own of content that you hold in your archive, or maybe you're a genealogist or an independent researcher, things that you refer to all the time. Maybe you're in some kind of niche field where you're like, oh gosh, if this website goes away, I don't know what I'm going to do. It might be possible for you to save a copy of it. Leading us to our second topic for today, how would we create one? And then finally, are there ethical or legal concerns? A little bit, we'll get into that too. So next slide, please. So here there are services that can help you create a web archive. So here's 4 of them. There are others. There's a bunch of others, but a lot of those had there's barriers. I mean, you have to have a certain amount of technological skill to create a web archive. The good news is that level is quite low. I did not have a technology background. I mean, I knew how to use computers. I have a library degree, but I did not know how to code. I did not know how to do a command line like DOS. So there are others that kind of require that, but I'm focusing on just these 4 today that are kind of better for beginners. Next slide, please. So the first one, Browsertrix, I think it gets the award for the coolest name. There's two versions of it, Browsertrix Cloud. So it happens in the cloud. You don't have to download a program to your computer. Like if you use Microsoft Word, just standalone Microsoft Word, it lives on your computer. You don't have to have the internet in order to type a word processed document. So a lot of web archiving takes place in the cloud. You don't, if you're using a software, it lives somewhere else. You don't have to download anything. You're just using your web browser to create the web archive. So Browsertrix will take care of a lot of things for you. And it's a browser-based crawling system, and it can run a very complex and customizable crawl. You can adjust settings for the scope, how much of the website you want to capture, and the depth. Like say you have your top level links, and then below that there's more links, and you go to those pages and there's more links. Websites have you can measure their depth. You can be like 3 links deep. So that can be configured with Browsertrix, and they'll take care of all of that for you for $30 a month. The other version of Browsertrix is you would have to have some technological skills. It would be self-hosted, and that is free and open source. Next slide, please. So our next example of a service that you could use to create a web archive is called archive.today. That's the web address. The best thing about that, it's easy. You just have to type in a URL. The drawbacks are it does not capture dynamic content like videos. It can capture some like Web 2.0 pages, like, where like there might be like a carousel where different images come onto your screen. They just kind of come on their own and they travel around in a carousel. It can capture some of that stuff. It does not capture PDFs or audio or video, but you get what you pay for. You also cannot make a collection. So you can't curate it the way we would curate things in an archive, like making different levels of collections based on different themes or topics. So again, back to its main, what it has to recommend it, it's easy. Next slide, please. Here is my favorite website to use as an example, which is the Backlog Company website. And so you just type in the URL here, and here's what it looked like. So I archived it. And here's what it looks like. It looks just like it does on the live web. You can see there that there are different things you can do, just a few. So you can get all the snapshots from, you can adjust the host a little bit. Some websites depend more on having the W's than others. You can see that you can download a zip file, so you can download a copy onto your computer. Next slide, please. So here's another look at what Archive Today looks like. This is a different example, woostel.edu. So that's from my other place of employment, Washington University in St. Louis, woostel.edu. So you can see here, there's a few captures. I did the most recent one, which is, if you look at the images of the websites, the one in the upper right, which is from February 2024. But you can see that people have done a bunch of other ones. There's one from 2012, one from 2019, and it kind of tells you what those are. And then below that, it will show you different web pages from that parent web page. Like here's one, Charles H. Dunker Hall. There's a web page on woostel.edu about this one particular hall. And there's another one, there's the campus map. So this is a fun one to play around with if you are new to web archives and you just want that sense of like, what would it be like if I saved a web page? So this would be good for that. Next slide, please. So our next service is called Archivist. It is a subsidiary of the big player in the field, the Internet Archive. Archivist is the service that you would use if you were kind of a larger organization or well-resourced. Many of the universities in the United States use this service, and other like kind of larger cultural heritage institutions. It's a software as a service. So again, I don't have to download a program on my computer. I just use Chrome or Firefox, and they have the software at their location in San Francisco. It allows you, so this is why you pay for it. You have very nuanced control over your crawls, your capturing of the web pages, your collections. You can put them into all different kinds of collections and metadata. You can add titles. You can say it's related to these other web pages. You can say, here's a creator. You can say, here's a collector. So those are the different metadata fields you can attach to the stuff that you save. And so that's the starting cost for it, $500 a year for, I think, rather a small amount of space. Next slide, please. So here's what it looks like. And you can go to the internet and check it out, see all of the institutions that use it and look at their collections. There is a possibility to be collecting web archive content, like for instance, Columbia University. They have a 6-month embargo, so they will collect content while they're talking to the owner of that web content, and they don't put it online for 6 months, just because they, and this we'll get into later when we talk about whether it's okay to archive web content that's not your own, that you didn't create. There's sort of a fair use thing going on with that, and that yes, somebody put up a website and you can probably save it, but if you want to be very conscientious about it, I'll get into how you would do that. So you can go there and archive-it.org and see a lot of different web archives that different people have curated. So here I have just typed in Michigan genealogy. In case you're interested in genealogy, you can see that there's about 1,300 total results, and that would be websites. So the first one here is Seeking Michigan by Web Archive, let me make my screen a little bit bigger. I can't quite see that. There we go. Oh gosh. Hold on a second. My computer's falling apart. I'll be right back with you folks. Oh gosh, the cord. Boy. Okay, here we are. So this is, I've got to get my windows rearranged. Sorry, bear with me. Here we go. I have a new computer set up and it has just been giving me fits. Gotta find all the stuff I need. Okay. I've got the window I need. Here we go. Okay, so this Seeking Michigan, first of 1,339 results, was captured by the Lansing Area Historical Website Collection by Michigan State University. That's the collection that it's in. So Michigan State University is collecting, they're just deciding, curating to collect resources that people might need that relate to genealogy. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a peek behind the curtain for, this is from my work at Washington University using archivist. Here's some of the URLs that I was just capturing. And you can see that there's several columns, documents, new documents, data, new data, blocked websites, queued web pages, out of scope web pages. So I have to balance all of these against each other. So this is why, so web archiving can be a full-time job. It can be just like a processing archivist or a film archivist or any other kind of archivist. Web is just on parallel with all of those. So it takes a lot of experience just slogging through all this stuff. So I have to be able to assess things like, okay, hematology.worcester.edu pulled in 3.5 gigabytes of data when I crawled it this last time. Is that okay? Along with purchasing the service, we purchase storage space. So I have a data budget. So I have to decide, do I want to spend 3.5 gigabytes of data on this one web page? So that's just to try and kind of disambiguate web archiving as a profession versus web archiving that anybody can do. With the service that I recommend the most, you will be able to kind of arrange your crawls, scope your crawls, control your crawls a little bit, but just not to this degree. Next slide, please. So here's one. It's called Community Webs. I talked about this in the first webinar a little bit. It is a service of Archivist. So Archivist charges all of these institutions to use their service, and they turn around and use that funding to give back to the community. This one in particular is a grant. So it's a grant that they would offer to these types of organizations, public libraries, cultural heritage orgs. And if you are that kind of organization, you might be a good candidate for this grant. So I'm throwing it into this webinar as well because they're having an info session coming up on March 13th. And you would go to this website in order to look into that more. It is communitywebs.archive-it.org. And next slide, please. So this is still the Community Webs, the service of Archivist. Whether you are that kind of organization, maybe you're just an independent person or researcher and you're not going to go for that grant, you can still go to Community Webs and get a little bit of education or more insight on what web archiving is or whether it's for you. You see they say here, web archiving lets practitioners preserve copies of web pages so they can be accessed long after those websites have gone away. Web archives aren't just static snapshots. So again, so just kind of explaining like web archive sounds great. What exactly is it? I still have to remind myself sometimes. There's putting things on the web and then there's archiving those things that you have put on the web. That reminds me, I meant to give a little shout out. So Backlog offers web hosting. If you, as part of being interested in web archives, if you're interested in maybe having web hosting, maybe it's your first website, maybe you've had a website or you've had websites before, but you don't currently, Backlog offers hosting. So if you're like, it is time for me to have a website of my own or for my organization that I work with or work for, Emma might be a good person to talk to about that. But next slide, we'll continue with Community Webs. So this is just further down on that page, why archive the web, introduction to Archivist. They have little videos that you can watch if you're still, trying to wrap your mind around it. These are great for beginners or people who are familiar with traditional archives and they just want to get into more digital archives. Next slide. And this is further down on that page. You can see that the people who work at Archivist, they are web archivists. That's like all they do. And so they have curated this list of, there's some PDFs there, websites. There's a podcast, which I've listened to. It's fantastic. If you're interested in getting more into this, but you have no idea how, maybe you're at an institution that you don't know if there's going to be any resources for you to do this work, this can help you lay the groundwork for your own education in this field. Next slide. So this is the Internet Archive. It is the first and biggest and best web archive. It's been around since 1996. There are a lot of other web archives out there. There's a lot of different countries. Many of the countries in the world have their own web archives. So outside of the US, you will find, the UK web archives, the French web archives, the Burmese web archives, the Philippine web archives, like dozens and dozens of countries have their own web archives, plus all of the institutions, the museums, cultural heritage orgs, all of that. If you add up all of those web archives together, they would be about equivalent in size to the Internet Archive. If you've used a web archive before, I would imagine it's probably this one with its Wayback Machine. You just type in the URL and you can see, your live journal from 1999, or you can type in, just for fun, like your favorite news source and say, wow, how long have they been around? There might be a capture dating back to like 1996. And if you are interested in web design, you can see how much web design has changed since those days. You can see here the colored icons. They also hold a lot more than just websites, books, movies, software, music, websites. And so let's go to the next page. We'll talk about the collections. So the Internet Archive has something called collections. Okay, so you can save, they have a save page now. You can just save one page one time. It won't get the whole website. It'll just get one page and you don't have to log in or anything. So if you just want to take 10 seconds to create a little web archive, you can do that. If you want to sign up for a free account, I would highly recommend doing this because you can do pretty much professional level web archiving for free with the help of Archivit. They're not the kind of help where you could call them and they could advise you. They don't offer that kind of service. They don't offer like one-on-one live help, but they have a lot of websites that explain really in a detailed way how to create your own web archive. So yeah, it's free. It's the most accessible and robust option. Next slide, please. So here are some of the collections. If you went to archive.org and you scroll down a little bit, you would start to see all of these collections. And I chose these just to show the diversity. I have to say my eye was drawn right to the Samsung manuals, first of all. I mean, when I need a manual for something, I just generally just Google it, but I don't know, maybe the person who created this web archive owns a Samsung appliance reseller and they need those manuals and they need them to be organized. That could very well be the purpose behind that. There's a lot of music there. The Vinyl Box, Guster is a band. So if you are a band and you want to get more of your music out to your listeners, maybe you don't have a bunch of videos to put on YouTube, you could put it here, organize it, maybe put some live stuff up, not have to deal with a record company. There's also YouTube Graveyard, which is also very intriguing, and NASA audio collection, which I have not yet clicked on, but I fully plan to because I assume it's the sounds of space, which, pretty interesting. Next slide, please. Okay, so collections. This would be an example of if you were to create one, what it might look like. I chose one that just seemed sort of tangentially related to genealogy, just as an interesting topic. So this collection is called LDS Church Magazines, periodicals from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it has 5,462 results, which means items. The item could be a pamphlet, it could be a website, it could be an image, it could be a podcast. But here are the first 4 of those 5,000 items, and I hovered over it when I was taking this screenshot to show you it was originally published. This publication ran from 1866 to 1929. So, and then there's a lot of facets or limiting, where you can limit your search down the left side. You can only see a couple of them here, but we'll look at more in subsequent slides. And yeah, let's do that. Next slide, please. So here is there's a little peek of what you would see for your help if you wanted to create an archive.org collection. They explain to you what a collection is, what you can put in it, how you can create it. They do want you to be a little bit serious about it. You have to have 50 items, and then you contact them and they will create a collection for you. And then at that point, you would have the ability to move things around and add different tags and add different, if you want to put things in different like folders, sort of a thing. Next slide, please. So here would be more of that help, that if you're interested in creating a collection on archive.org, they want you to have they say they suggested identifier. So they want you to be thoughtful about choosing a name for your archive. They want you to add at least one subject tag. They want people, if they're going to create a collection, they want them to not just, put up an empty collection with no subject tags on it. It's going to be, among all of those, like the NASA space one and the music ones, they want to have things in their collection that contain content and that have topics and that are findable for users. You can even add a logo. You can even have an archive.org email address. So it's kind of a pretty sweet deal for free. Next slide, please. So if you had a collection, again, this is some of the things that would be available to you. As the administrator of your collection, the graph in the upper left shows views or visits by people in the yellow and by robots in the light blue. Robots are what make web crawlers work. So if you say you create a web archive of, say you're a model railroad enthusiast, and there's a ton of model railroad websites that you really want to make sure are there for as long as possible, even if their owners are no longer paying the bills and putting them online. And maybe you want these to be found by other model railroad enthusiasts. So you'll want to be, the robots will make sure that happens. So the robots would be owned by Google or, Alexa or Siri, making sure that if people do an internet search, they can find your stuff. On the right, this was for that Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint genealogy collection. This is the people who visited it in the last 30 days. Number one region, Stoke-on-Trent in the UK. So from that, you would be able to find out who's looking at your stuff. Next slide, please. So how did I find that LDS collection? So I went to archive.org and I did a search for genealogy, and I got 327,160 results. Those results are items. So again, it could be like a page or a pamphlet or a magazine or a website or a movie or an audio recording. And I am interested in genealogy, but I do not have time to look through 327,000 things. I want to find stuff that I want. Maybe I'm really interested in just Michigan genealogy. So we're going to do some very powerful sorting and limiting. Next slide, please. Here is, I made a few slides about the sorting and limiting that you can do, because this will be useful for you just as a user, as a researcher. And if you created a web archive, it would also be included in all of these things here. So, under collection, the bottom one says Allen County Public Library. Maybe your model railroad website web archive collection would be up there as well. 75,000 items, and people could find it. So whether you're a user or creator, you can limit by all of these and get filtered down from those 300,000 things to just the things you want. You can limit by year. There's more years as well if you're interested in the ancient past prior to 1982. Next slide, please. A couple more of those. So creator, you yourself might be the creator. Maybe you have a website. In this particular search that I did, it turns out that the Census Bureau was a big creator. So with a lot of resources provided by them. So maybe it's a field you're just getting into and you see who the creators are and you're like, oh my goodness, I should have gone to the Census Bureau long ago. They have all the stuff I need. National Archives and Records Service, also, like, apparently they're the people I should be going to. And you can see the image on the right. For creator, there are 13,000, or sorry, no, not that many. 1,341 creators. So if you want just things that are created by the United States Court of Claims, you can limit to that. And then it's just 300 things to look through. And then you won't be stressed out because you're like, I think I can do that. Next slide, please. And here's the final slide about the facets or the metadata limiters. This particular one reminds me of the date slider that you would find on like a scholarly resource database. You can see here I have pushed that the slider over so that it's rested on where it says 1,151 items that are regarding events happening from the mid 1600s until 1709. If you're interested in a particular time period and only that particular time period, this can be very powerful for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of the final portion of the talk, ethical considerations. So I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with fair use, but I'll just kind of go over it a little bit. Like if you want to take a screenshot of a web page, NewYorkTimes.com, and email it to a friend, New York Times does not want to sue you for that. If you want to cut out a newspaper article or a magazine article and mail it in the mail to your grandma, no problem with that. This is why if you go on like social media and people have put songs in the background of their content, that's possible through fair use. You're not trying to say this is my music. You're not trying to make money from it. Those are kind of the underlying tenets of fair use. So think about, so far in the web archiving world, we're kind of thinking of archiving other people's websites as similar to that. So at Washington University, we made a website or a web archive of news articles during the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, how the pandemic affected WashU and how WashU affected the pandemic, because they do a lot of research there. And, so we're archiving articles on npr.org, cnn.com. And is it okay that we did that? I mean, so we think so, but we're all kind of collectively, professionally starting to look into that. And if you want to dive into that, I would recommend Yale as a starting point. Just if you Google Yale Web Archives, they've collected a few takes on it, which we're going to get into more in a little bit here. There's also several professional bodies. If you think about like ALA, American Library Association for Libraries, there's a Society of American Archivists for archives, or like the American Medical Association. There's professional bodies that sometimes some of them have like a ruling relationship with the people in the field. Sometimes it's just professional advancement. But here's three that are in the library/archives world, and they have taken on looking at ethics relating to web archives. The International Internet Preservation Consortium in particular is global. So they will look at, for instance, in the UK, in many other countries, they'll have a requirement of legal deposit where anything that's published has to go to their national library. And okay, now we have web pages. Well, the web pages also have to go to their national library. They've actually amended their rule in 2013, saying that specifically including websites in that. And I don't have the quote right in front of me, but actually, let me see. Let me look at my notes. No, I don't. Here we go. Here we go. No, I don't have it. But it's the leader of the UK National Library. He's like, we don't want these things. We don't want everybody's Facebook posts. We really wish we didn't have to collect it. So with that in mind, the United States does not have legal deposit, and I am quite thankful. Let's see, as far as professional bodies, the Digital Library Federation, they have an arm or there's a section called the NDSA that does a survey of professional web archivists every few years. And the last one just came out, just went to a conference in November where they shared the findings from that survey. And institutions are starting to ask permission of website owners to capture their stuff or at least notify them. Next slide, please. So here's what that looks like. If I am creating a web archive and I'm going to archive a website that's not mine, I can give no notification. So many of us are doing. That's what WashU has been doing. We're now talking to our legal people to see if there's anything. We want to be more conscientious about it. We don't think that what we're doing is against the law, but we would like to be address it specifically and have a specific policy addressing it. Another approach would be to notify with a 6-month embargo period. As I mentioned, Columbia University in particular is doing that method. You can notify, hey, we're going to archive your website. If you have an issue with this, we will be happy to take it down. And then the final one would be ask permission, which I don't think any of the large institutions are really looking into, with the exception of the Library of Congress. I have a little bit of something to quote from the Library of Congress. So they have a very small web page collection compared with the Internet Archive. And that's because they generally don't collect a web page without asking. The leader of the Library of Congress's web archiving team, her name is Abby Grotke. She says, the Internet Archive hoovers. We can't hoover because we have to notify site owners and get permissions. So the Library of Congress has something like an opt-in policy, whereas the Internet Archive has an opt-out policy. One more thing about this, as we're getting close to the end of the presentation, but I thought this quote really gets at, like, ethically, I think what we want to be doing in the field. There is quite a long history of archival ethics. It's an important facet of the field of archives. So this is from, her name's Pamela Graham. She's the director of the Center for Human Rights Documentation and Research at Columbia. And here's what she says. The permissions approach that they used there was initially motivated by a desire to demonstrate due diligence in the absence of legal standards for archiving the open web. So that's why we're just kind of going ahead and doing things, because there is an absence of legal standards there. It was quickly apparent that the approach had important ethical purposes as well. It communicated their recognition that groups have a right to know that their materials are being collected and preserved, and that they retain the right to opt out of the process. Contacting the groups, often challenging and time-consuming, open lines of communication that could become important for other reasons. Obtaining their suggestions of other websites for the archive, raising awareness of the value of preservation of their organizational activities and histories, bringing more overall visibility, especially to smaller groups that are less discoverable via search engines on the open web. So just the tone of her statement there kind of put me in the mind of, like, yes, we're not just asking permission or providing notification because we don't want to get in trouble. We're doing it to further connection between different organizations in the field, to share knowledge, to share research, to maybe share resources, and to show respect to the people who own the content that they're putting on the web. And just her saying that, yeah, the groups have a right to know that their materials are being collected and preserved. It's kind of like, yes, we should definitely pursue this. We should definitely do that. Next slide, please. So this is just a screenshot from the first one. If you're interested in looking it up, their backlog archivists and historians on YouTube, and also at the bottom of the slide, there's backlogs, URL backlog-archivist.com. So if you're interested in that, or if you need a little more background, I hope you check that out. And I think we may have a little time for questions, but first, before we open it up for that, I want to hand it back over to Emma. So take it away, Emma.
Yeah, so we'll do questions in just a second, but I want to talk about our upcoming webinars first. So the next one, we're back with Sarah, and we'll talk about researching with Web Archive. So what do we do? How do we use it? You know, we've gathered all of it. How do we use it for research? And so even if you're not doing research, and if you're a librarian or archivist who works in reference or sits at the reference desk every once in a while, this would be a good one. And that's on Monday, March 25th. And if you just go to backlog-archivist.com/webinars, you can register for it there. And then in April, we're going to do a webinar on EAD, or encoded archival description. So that's just kind of another one of our kind of archival basics. We did Dublin Core and Finding AIDS last spring, and we thought we'd tackle EAD this spring. And again, like Sarah said, if you want to check out our previous webinars, you can check out our YouTube page. This will be posted there later this week. And then if you've got a question, feel free to unmute, and you can just throw it out, or we can raise hands, whatever works. We don't have a chat tonight, so you do have to unmute in order to ask a question. So Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about the next webinar?
Absolutely. So again, it's going to contain components of, what is a web archive, because I feel like we're all just kind of getting used to what web archives are. But so, all these institutions, universities, we're all collecting these web archives. But what do you do with them? One example, it's a little bit of a unique example I mentioned in the first webinar, which was that you can use it in curriculum. So there were several K through 12 schools that allowed their students to create a web archive, just about anything they wanted. And just as a way of, it's one thing to use the web, we all, most of us, use the web. But it's another thing. It's like, you might know something, but until you start to be able to teach it, you maybe don't know it as fully as you would otherwise. So that's a pretty cool thing to do with web archives. But like I mentioned in this one, I got super into the facets, the limiting factors. Web archive. So there's Google, right? Which is easy to use, gives you what you want right away. And then there's other non-Google resources, which you find a lot in libraries and archives, where you really need to maybe have a research consultation with somebody who works there, because they're just different programs, and you need to know how to best structure your search. So that's the kind of thing we'll be getting into.
Great. Yeah.
And if people don't have questions now, but maybe you are like, okay, I need to go back a little bit, maybe watch the first webinar, maybe you want to send Emma an email, and we can always answer stuff later on. It looks like somebody has a question though.
Yeah, April, do you want to go ahead and unmute and just shoot?
Sure, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for hosting these and putting these on. I just graduated my MLIS in December and a focus in archiving. So I appreciate these hands-on resources, because I'm just trying to add to the repertoire.
Cool, great. Yeah, I'm glad it can be useful. I got my MLS a long time ago, but I'm finding that the education never ends.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that, April. Really appreciate it. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and end us here, or end the webinar here. but if you have a question, go ahead and shoot me an email. And then I can also pass it along to Sarah. But thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And then we hope to see you in March on our third and final one on web archiving. But thank you everybody for coming this evening. Have a good night.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.